There are foundational steps that need to be in place prior to the death of the senior pastor. How do you make that happen? Well, there are key players that need to be in place to make it possible. Right, and it kind of takes someone like you to do ministry and business so that you can understand. We're not talking about a funeral director, we're not talking about stuff like that. We're talking about a whole different gamut of things that basically I've not heard discussed before, and that is the preparations in case of for an actual ministry or church. And so I really appreciate the abilities that you're bringing to the table today and that we're able to share with our listenership about how do we go from here in our church family. How do we make sure the pastor's wife is taken care of, or the pastor's husband is taken care of in some cases, where everything will go smoothly. So, we talk about those kinds of things, and I've got a couple other questions I want to ask you about, Minister Anderson. And so the foundational steps that we're talking about taking to change the course when a church is off track. One of those, of course, is educating, which is what we're doing today. Do you recommend that maybe a board watch something like we're doing right now? Watch it to get started understanding?
I believe that there is definitely an opportunity for that. Some of the work that I've done with nonprofits that have successful boards and successful nonprofits, those board members are people that care about the cause.
Okay.
And those are the right kind of people that you want. But that does not always mean that they have the insight about the dynamics of that nonprofit or the dynamics of that ministry. And their skill sets and why they were chosen to be on that board or to be a trustee are not necessarily related to how do we actually help the ministry, with the exception of where they've gotten people to have financial acumen, because ministries are looking for finances and resources and so on. But if I have all the money in the world, but it's managed inappropriately, I'm still devastated.
Right.
If I have all the knowledge in the world, but I don't have the documents to support it, it still leaves me with a deficit. So when I say foundational steps, what I mean is, how do we evaluate what is the situation for the pastor and his family, or pastoral leadership? Because there's some churches where it's not a single pastor.
Right, it's team ministry.
It's team ministry. And if that person isn't resolved or that person isn't addressed, then the probability of the other pastors and other leaders often is going to mirror what the senior pastor is.
Yes.
So you have multiple families that is the case. And so we have to evaluate the leadership. And when I say evaluate, I mean what things are in place, what structures in place, what governing documents in place, what tax things are in place, what financial resources are in place to address their situation. Then we have to evaluate the ministry as a whole, meaning what are the governing documents, how the decision processes work, how the financial things are handled there. And then beyond that, what parties are necessary for the longevity of the ministry. Because you can have the right solution in place today, but when life happens, when ministry happens, when events happen, if what you had in place is not robust enough to address those things, then you continue down a path being negatively impacted. And that was amplified during this pandemic over the last 18 to 24 months. I believe every ministry, from the largest in the world to the smallest in the world, have had to reinvent themselves.
Yes.
Have had to rediscover how to connect with the folks that they serve, and have had to identify what things they had in place and what they didn't have in place in order for the ministry to continue to move forward. And just like I know, that there are very many ministries that were ministries prior to the pandemic and are no longer ministries at this time. And that should not be the case. And so it's great, again, that Grief God Ministries has a burden for helping widows and helping pastors and helping ministries not repeat that cycle. And so that's been a burden of mine for a long time. to be able to help men and women of God to be in position to, one, preserve their quality of life and standard of living, to preserve the ministry, and to protect the work of God. And that can't be done if we don't address those foundational steps of where things are with the pastor, where things are with the ministry, and where things are with who's involved in those decisions.
Right. So the parties that are involved in this whole process can be the people of the church.
They can.
As long as they have a burden and they want to help facilitate a solution. So it's more than just a, well, we put it on paper now, that's good enough. No, there are legs and hands that go with us, obviously. But based on the size of the ministry, pretty much anyone can put some solutions in place, right?
The short answer to that is yes. What happens is you have a gradient of levels that ministries have put things in place. And oddly enough, some of the larger ministries that have, I'll say, denominations that have these structures in place, I don't know that there is a medium or a platform for them to have communicated it to other denominations, because they don't all do it the same way, and they don't all have access to the same things. But as readily as we share the gospel, this information should be accessible to the body of Christ, and it should be something that gets retaught and rebuilt from generation to generation, and from succession to succession, and from ministry to ministry. So we have to take action and begin moving down that path. And so some of the tools that are being prepared in our ministry for serving churches is actually having that questionnaire that says, okay, let me take a look at this. Let's answer these questions.
I think that questionnaire would be worth gold. To know, okay, I didn't even know to ask this question.
Right.
This is really important. Yeah, what about that? You know?
Let me answer these questions. And based on taking a look at these questions, if I were to pass away today, this is the predicament my family would be in.
Yes.
If I were disabled today, this is the predicament my family is in. If I were to, if for some reason I had to leave the ministry, this is the predicament the ministry would be in. And so, and then here's the other thing, like the example that you used when the missionary went to do the work of God and passed away, and the spouse that was in that ministry, there was nothing in place for her to be able to respond.
Absolutely nothing.
And so it cannot be that way. And
it should not. It's an unnecessary trauma that doesn't need to happen.
Exactly. The way that I've seen it, it's as if the dealing with the loss or the grief or the difficulty or devastation isn't enough.
Right.
Now you have to also deal with the fact that you have to fight.
Go get a job when you've never had a career outside the church.
And there you go.
Go back to school when you haven't been to school in 20, 30 years. I've heard all kinds of stories that are so traumatizing that the man of God never would have wanted to happen to his wife.
That's true.
Didn't plan for that. But the problem is, it just didn't plan at all.
There you go.
So, what do you think about ministries sometimes that just say, well, the Lord's going to take care?
I would ask, show me your biblical reference.
Good one.
But that's the truth. Show me your biblical reference. When we often hear that statement, it is when we have placed the entire burden on God and we have absolved ourselves.
Oh.
But I'll tell you a story that helped me to understand that. There was a man that bought a property that happened to be in a cul-de-sac. And in that property that he bought in the cul-de-sac, it was all grown over, the ground was horrible, but he bought the land. So after he bought the land, his passion was truly gardening. And so he went out and he tilled the ground he got the flowers, and it was so beautiful. You know, some people would equate it to what it was like when you would go in Italy and see the hanging gardens. And so literally people in the neighborhood would drive in that cul-de-sac just to come and see
it.
that garden. And one day, a man pulled up to the garden, and he saw the man out gardening. He said, "Oh my goodness, I just want to tell you, this is truly beautiful. God has blessed you with a beautiful garden." And the man said, "Well, thank you very much. I put a lot of work into it." He said, "No, God has blessed you with a beautiful garden." And he said, "Well, the work that I put into it contributed to it." And so finally, the man was like, "No, God's blessed you with it." And so he looked at him and he said, "You are absolutely right. God provided the sun, he provided the rain, he provided photosynthesis. But if you had seen it when God had it by himself, you would understand that it is a balance between the work of the kingdom and God using us as an instrument of his glory."
Yes.
God sent Jesus to be a man and to operate in this earth to fulfill his purpose and his destiny. He didn't do it from heaven.
Right. He didn't.
He sent Jesus. And that example is the truth, that it's a balance between submitted flesh
Yes.
and the Spirit of God fulfilling the destiny and purpose that we have. So it is definitely a complement of the things that we must do and the things that God has ordained.
Right.
And they have to be married together to get the result and to get the desired result in ministries. So if you don't take anything else away from this exchange today, here's what I would leave with you. It is absolutely critical to evaluate what condition my family would be in if something happens to me. What would happen with the ministry? What is in place to respond to those two things? And if I don't have the knowledge, where can I go to get those resources?
Yes.
And who can I trust in the kingdom to help me take the steps in the right direction? Every ministry is at a different level.
Mm-hmm.
And they face different challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is why I understand that for some ministries, it's really going to be them actually being engaged in something where the content is presented and they can go back.
Right. And then
take
fill
those
in the
homeworks.
blanks and stuff. Yes.
And in other ministries, it's going to be, let's do this introspection and evaluate where the holes are,
Right.
and let's start filling up those holes.
Right.
Our desire is to be able to give that guidance and to be able to be that support to ministries.
You know, Minister Anderson, I really think you've come into the kingdom of God for such a time as this. Because this subject right here, I have never heard it discussed. And I was married to a man of God 45 years who built 3 churches, preached around the world, but I've never heard anybody talk about this face to face in terminology that is really clear and understood well. I am now living in the aftermath of my husband's death. So I want to talk about it because the reality for me is I'm seeing pastors and their wives all over this world that are oblivious to this situation, that it could happen, and yet I'm living proof that it does happen. It can happen, but it doesn't have to be a fearful thing.
That's true.
It can be things put in place that you have a comfort. You know, we talk about surrendering our lives to the Lord, but the responsibility that comes alongside us as men of God, as women of God, is to provide for our children, our mates. And so, Minister Anderson, I want you to give a little information. Where can people contact you about this issue? How can they help?
About this issue, my email
Okay, give it to us.
is ministergla@glaministries.org. Again, that is ministergla@glaministries.org. Ministries.org.
We will post this in the comments so you can get his information. But I encourage you, contact him. Just start making a plan. It starts with that first step forward. Once that is taken and you've got things in place, you talk about peace of mind. You talk about an area that the devil no longer has free access to bring total disruption and devastation into your family. This is an area you can fix. You can put things in place. I want to thank you very much for joining Grief Guide Ministries today and providing us this most valuable information. Thank you. I'm Dr. Gayla. We'll see you next time.